She stole his only horse. He just smiled and said, "Stay if you're tired of running." The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the empty plains. The wind howled through the tall grasses, whispering of secrets only the wild could understand. In the distance, the shape of a lone ranch came into view. Its weathered wooden fence stood against the harsh elements of the land, while the stone walls of the ranch house seemed as if they had been there for ages. It was a place untouched by the rush of the world, a place that didn't demand attention but silently offered peace to those who needed it. But there was no peace for the young woman now. Her chest heaved with the strain of the last few days. She had been running for so long from her past, from the choices she had made, from the life she had once known. The endless dust of the road, the feeling of being hunted, had pushed her to the edge. She didn't know how long she had been on the move, but it felt like a lifetime. She could no longer remember the warmth of comfort or the joy of a simple day without fear. She pulled the reins of the horse tighter, urging it to go faster. It was her only companion now. The horse was a strong one built for endurance, its coat a rich brown that gleamed even in the dimming light. But even the best horses had limits, and she could see her mount growing tired. The creature's steps were slower now, the steady rhythm of hooves beginning to falter. The woman's heart pounded in her chest, not just from the strain of riding, but from the constant fear gnawing at her mind. It was getting late, and the sky was starting to darken. She needed shelter. She needed somewhere to rest, a place where she could catch her breath and regain her strength. The ranch ahead seemed like an oasis in the wilderness. She knew it was a risk, but what choice did she have? There was no one else for miles, no other shelter for her to seek. She reached the ranch and stopped her horse at the edge of the yard. The ranch house was still, its windows dark. The land around it was quiet, nothing but the sound of the wind brushing past the tall grass. There was no sign of life, no movement at all. For a moment she just stood there, staring at the house, wondering if it was a mistake to stop here. Her mind raced with doubt, but then the silence called to her. She had no other option. She dismounted carefully, making sure to stay light on her feet, aware of the vulnerability she carried. The horse shifted its weight, stomping a hoof in impatience. The woman patted its neck gently before tying it to a post nearby. She had always been a quick thinker, but now every decision seemed to carry more weight than usual. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she approached the front door of the ranch house. It looked old, weather-beaten, but sturdy. She hesitated for only a moment before knocking. The sound echoed in the empty yard, making her feel even more exposed. No answer. She knocked again. Louder this time, but still no answer. Her hand was still on the door when she heard a sound from behind her. She turned quickly, her breath caught in her throat. A man stood at the edge of the yard, just beyond the light of the porch, his figure barely visible in the twilight. His face was obscured by the shadows, but she could see that he was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore the simple attire of a rancher, worn leather boots and a hat that shielded his face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt thick, filled with the tension of two strangers unsure of what to do next. The man didn't move, but the woman could feel the weight of his gaze on her, as though he was trying to figure her out without saying a word.
"I didn't mean to intrude," she said, her voice soft but steady.
"I'm just looking for a place to rest." The man's gaze lingered for a moment longer before he spoke, his voice calm, but with an edge of curiosity. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" She couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth. How far she had run, how many days she had spent moving without stopping. The desperation she had been carrying for so long weighed heavily on her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of doubt. "I've been traveling," she finally said. "Just need a place to stay for a bit." Instead, he nodded slowly and stepped forward, moving past her to the door. With a swift motion, he unlocked it and pushed it open. "Come in," he said simply, his voice like the creaking of old wood. "Get out of the cold." She stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had been on the run for so long, unable to trust anyone, always looking over her shoulder. But there was something about this man, something in his stillness, that made her hesitate. The kindness in his voice didn't feel like a trap. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The warmth of the house enveloped her, and she immediately felt the weight of exhaustion crash down on her. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting a flickering glow over the room. It was a simple place, but there was something comforting about its quiet solitude. She glanced around, noticing the worn furniture and the sparse decorations. There was a feeling of abandonment here, as though the ranch had once been full of life, but had settled into a quiet, solitary existence. The man gestured toward a chair by the fire. "Sit down. I'll get you something to eat." The woman didn't argue. She collapsed into the chair, her body sore from days of riding, her mind still racing with the adrenaline of her flight. The fire was warm, and for the first time in a long while she allowed herself to relax. She could feel the weight of her muscles as they unwound, the tension melting from her shoulders. The man returned with a small plate of bread and cheese, offering it to her without a word. She took it gratefully, her hands trembling slightly as she ate. It had been days since she had had anything this simple, this comforting. The food wasn't much, but it felt like a luxury. She didn't realize how hungry she was until the food was in her hands, and then she devoured it quickly, not caring for the manners she once had. She needed sustenance, but more than that, she needed a moment of peace. As she finished the last bite, the man remained silent, watching her from across the room. There was no judgment in his eyes, only an unreadable calm. The silence stretched between them, thick and comfortable, like the steady rhythm of a world that didn't rush. The woman looked up at him, her eyes lingering on the way the firelight danced on his face. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. The man simply nodded, his expression still unreadable. "Do you mind if I rest here for the night?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rest as long as you need," he replied softly. The woman nodded, unsure of what to say next. She had no idea who this man was, or why he had offered her shelter so willingly. But as the quiet of the house wrapped around her, she began to feel a small flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: safety.
Maybe, for the first time in forever, she could stop running.
The man didn't say anything else. He simply turned away and went to the other side of the room, leaving her in the quiet warmth of the fire. The woman sat back in her chair, her eyes closing as she allowed herself to drift into the kind of sleep she hadn't known in days, deep, uninterrupted, and free from fear. The morning light seeped through the small window, casting soft rays across the room. The woman slowly opened her eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire that had kept her company through the night. For the first time in days, she didn't feel the weight of exhaustion pulling at her bones. She felt rested, peaceful, though still unsure of everything around her. The man's quiet kindness had made her feel safe, but that same safety came with a price: the question of what would happen next. She sat up in the chair, rubbing her eyes. Her mind was still hazy from sleep, but the thoughts quickly flooded back. Her past, the reason she had been running. Her mind raced with doubt and fear, but she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. She had to focus on the present moment. For now, she was here, in this quiet place, with the stranger who had shown her nothing but calm and patience. The room was still, the silence hanging heavy between them. She could hear the soft crackling of the fire as the man moved about in the other room. The house, though simple, had a certain charm. The scent of wood and earth lingered in the air, mixing with the smell of fresh bread and stew that she could already detect. Her stomach growled softly in response, reminding her of the hunger she had felt only the day before. The woman stood up, stretching her aching muscles. She felt stronger than she had in a while, though her mind was still clouded with uncertainty. She needed to make a decision. Should she leave and continue running, or stay for a while and find some peace? Could she trust this man, or was he just offering a temporary respite before the next chapter of her life? Her thoughts swirled, but she couldn't come to a conclusion just yet. As she took a few tentative steps toward the door, she heard the man's footsteps coming closer. He entered the room, carrying a small pot of stew and a bowl. He set them down on the table in front of her, his movements deliberate and calm. She looked up at him, unsure of what to say. "You should eat," he said simply, his voice low but steady. "It'll help you regain your strength." She nodded, her stomach giving another loud growl as she picked up the spoon. The stew was warm and comforting, full of rich flavors that she hadn't tasted in so long. It wasn't a fancy meal, but it was exactly what she needed. She ate in silence, savoring each bite as the man watched her, not speaking, just observing. She found herself glancing at him every now and then, wondering what he was thinking. He hadn't asked her any questions, hadn't pried into her past. He simply allowed her to be. After finishing the meal, she sat back in the chair, feeling the weight of the food settling in her stomach. She wasn't used to being cared for, at least not like this. There was something about the way the man treated her, something different from the coldness she had known in the past. He wasn't trying to control her, wasn't making her feel guilty or like a burden. He was just offering kindness, something she had nearly forgotten existed. The silence between them grew, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, a quiet understanding that neither of them needed to fill with words. The man seemed content to let her be, and she didn't know how to feel about that. She had been alone for so long, always running, always on the move. The idea of staying, of accepting his kindness, felt foreign, but it was also strangely appealing. Finally, the man spoke, breaking the silence. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need."
The words hung in the air, and the woman's heart skipped a beat.
It was such a simple offer, but it felt like more than just an invitation to rest. It was a chance to stop running, to let go of the fear and the uncertainty, even if only for a little while. But she was torn. She couldn't just forget her past, couldn't pretend like everything would be okay just because she had found a quiet place to hide. She looked at the man, trying to read his expression, but he was unreadable. There was no judgment in his eyes, no suspicion. He wasn't asking for anything in return, wasn't trying to get anything out of her. He was simply offering her a place to be, a place to heal. "Why?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Why are you helping me?" He just watched her with a calmness that made her feel like he was seeing right through her, not with any judgment, but with an understanding she couldn't quite grasp.
"Everyone needs a place to rest sometimes," he finally said, his voice as steady as ever.
"The world is a hard place, and we all find our way in it however we can." His words made something stir inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. She had spent so much time trying to outrun her mistakes, trying to escape her past, that she had forgotten what it felt like to just exist without fear. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to stay, to let go of the constant running, the constant worry that someone would find her and drag her back into the life she had left behind. But then the fear crept back in. She couldn't shake the nagging thought that this moment of peace couldn't last. There were people out there looking for her, people who wouldn't just let her disappear into the quiet of this ranch. She couldn't stay here forever, not without putting this man in danger. She couldn't risk his safety. "Do you ever feel like you're just waiting for something to change?" she asked, her voice quieter now, as if the question was one she had been asking herself for a long time.
The man didn't answer immediately.
He looked out the window, his gaze distant as if he was lost in his own thoughts. Then he turned back to her, his expression unchanged. "Sometimes," he said, "but change comes in its own time. You can't force it." She nodded slowly, trying to take in his words. There was wisdom in his voice, something that came from years of living a quiet, solitary life. It wasn't a life she could understand fully, but for a moment, she found herself wishing for that same peace, the kind that came from accepting the present without constantly looking over your shoulder. "I don't know how long I can stay," she said softly, almost to herself. "I'm not sure what's going to happen next." The man nodded, as if he understood. "You don't have to know everything," he said. "Just take it one day at a time. You don't have to decide all at once." The woman sat there for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. She didn't have to make a decision right now. She didn't have to choose between staying and running. For the first time in a long time, she could just be. The man stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. "I'll go check on the horses," he said. "You can rest if you like." She nodded, watching him as he left the room. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to follow, to keep moving. She was here, in this moment, in this quiet place. Maybe that was enough for now. The day passed slowly, each moment marked by the quiet hum of life on the ranch. The woman found herself wandering the property, the vast open land stretching out before her in every direction. It was a different kind of solitude here, one that was not filled with the harsh, frantic energy she had known in the past. Here the air felt cleaner, the silence somehow more peaceful than threatening. It was the first time in what felt like forever that she could breathe without the constant pressure of looking over her shoulder. She wandered toward the small barn where the horses were kept. The man was outside, tending to them with the same quiet patience he had shown the night before. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, methodical, gentle, as if every action had a purpose, every step calculated without haste. He didn't rush, didn't seem to care about time in the way the world demanded. It was a way of living she had never known, but found strangely appealing. As she approached, he glanced over his shoulder and gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, his face still mostly hidden under the brim of his hat. "They're fine," he said, his voice calm as always. "Taking to the new pasture well enough." She nodded in response, unsure of how to continue the conversation. There was a certain quiet between them, an unspoken understanding that neither of them felt the need to break. She had spent so much time alone in her own mind, and now that she was here, in this unfamiliar place, she didn't know how to talk about anything, especially herself. The walls she had built around herself over the years were so high, so thick, that she had almost forgotten how to let anyone in. "I'm not sure what to do next," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt strange coming from her, but they were true. She hadn't known what to do for so long, hadn't known where she was going or why she kept running. But now, in this quiet, there was a part of her that wondered if it was time to stop running. She just didn't know if she could. The man turned fully to face her now, the light of the late afternoon sun catching the lines of his weathered face. His expression was unreadable, but there was no judgment in his eyes, no pity, just a quiet patience that made her feel like she wasn't the burden she had always believed herself to be. "You don't have to know everything," he said simply. "You don't have to decide all at once." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. It wasn't often that people said things like that, things that weren't laced with hidden agendas or expectations. People in her past always wanted something. Answers, action, a decision. But this man, he didn't ask for anything from her. He simply let her be. "I'm just tired," she said quietly, not really knowing why she was telling him this. The words felt heavy, like they carried all the weight of the past few years with them. It was strange to admit it out loud, but she was tired. Tired of running. Tired of hiding. Tired of the fear that followed her every step. The man nodded, his face softening in understanding. "I reckon we all get tired. Life's a lot of running, a lot of moving. But there's always a time to stop." She didn't answer right away. She simply looked at the horses, their coats shining under the sun, the sound of their hooves as they grazed filling the air. She had never spent much time around animals, not like this. She had seen them before, of course, on farms and ranches. But the connection between the man and the horses was different. He wasn't just using them. They seemed to trust him, as though they recognized the quiet strength in him. It was something she longed to understand. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, the woman sat down on a nearby wooden bench. The silence between them was comfortable now, a calm stillness that settled over the ranch like the evening mist rolling in from the hills. She felt herself slipping into it, the constant tension she had carried for so long beginning to loosen, little by little. After a while, the man stood and began to gather the reins of the horses, preparing to move them back to the barn. He worked quickly, but there was no rush in his actions. He didn't seem to care about the setting sun, or the time ticking away. There was only the moment, and it was a way of living that was both foreign and familiar to her. When he finished, he turned back to her. "You don't have to help if you don't want to," he said, his voice gentle, "but you're welcome to stay." She stood up, stretching her legs before following him back toward the barn. She didn't say anything at first, unsure of how to explain the strange feeling that had come over her. It was as if something inside her was waking up, something she hadn't even known was there. She had been running for so long, always focused on the next step, the next escape. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was standing still, and it felt right. As they worked together in the barn, her mind continued to wander. She watched the way the man moved, so comfortable in his space, so at ease with the rhythm of life here. He seemed to have found something she had been searching for her entire life: peace. It wasn't something that could be bought or found in the rush of cities or the noise of crowds. It was found in the quiet of a ranch, in the work that kept a person grounded to the earth. She looked around at the barn, the hay that was piled neatly in the corners, the tools that were worn but well cared for, and the sense of order in the chaos of the ranch. There was a quiet beauty in the simplicity of it all. She hadn't known it before, but she could feel it now. There was something healing in the way the man worked, in the way he didn't expect anything from her, didn't rush her into making decisions. He was giving her something she had never been given: time. The day stretched on, and as the stars began to twinkle overhead, the woman found herself sitting by the fire once again. The man had prepared a small meal, simple but satisfying. There was no need for extravagance here. The food wasn't fancy, but it was enough, and it was shared in a quiet kind of peace that she had never known. As they ate, the woman felt something inside her shift. She didn't know what it was, didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time she wasn't focused on what might happen next. She was here, and that was enough. She looked over at the man who was eating his meal in silence. His face was calm, his eyes focused on the fire, and for the first time she wondered what had brought him to this life, to this place. What had made him choose this quiet existence, away from the world? She didn't ask, though. She didn't need to. The peace between them spoke louder than any question could. For the first time in a long time, the woman allowed herself to feel safe. She didn't know how long she would stay, or what would happen next, but she didn't need to. The man had shown her that sometimes, just being in the moment was enough. The days began to blend together as the woman settled into her new routine on the ranch. Each morning the soft light of dawn would seep through the cracks of the barn, signaling the start of a new day. She would wake early, still feeling the quiet energy of the land around her, the kind of stillness that had begun to feel more like home than anything she had known in the past. The world here was simpler, slower, and in its simplicity there was a kind of peace she had never imagined. At first, she had hesitated to ask for help or to offer any. She wasn't used to this kind of life, and her instinct was still to stay in the background, to keep to herself and avoid drawing attention. But little by little she began to find herself doing small tasks around the ranch. She helped with feeding the animals, mucking out the stalls, and even started learning about the crops the man grew in the small garden behind the house. It wasn't much, but each task made her feel a little more grounded, a little more connected to the life she had found here. The man, whose name she still hadn't asked, didn't push her. He simply allowed her to go at her own pace, never rushing her, never questioning her silence. He worked alongside her, his calm presence offering a kind of quiet strength that helped her relax and trust that she could move forward without rushing. The days were long, filled with the work that came with maintaining a ranch, but they were also filled with moments of quiet connection. There was the rhythm of the horses' hooves as they were led out to pasture, the sound of wind rustling through the trees, and the occasional distant call of a bird overhead. It was a far cry from the chaos she had once lived in, and yet it was exactly what she needed. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, she found herself watching him again. The man moved with an ease that she envied. His hands, weathered and rough, worked the soil with a practiced grace, pulling weeds, adjusting plants, and tending to the rows of vegetables that seemed to thrive under his care. She wondered, not for the first time. What had brought him to this isolated life? There was a quiet strength in him, something steady and unshakable, but it was wrapped in mystery. He never spoke much about his past, and she didn't feel ready to ask. She knew her own past was still too fresh, still too painful to talk about, so she respected the space he had created for himself. She thought about what he had said to her in the past few days, about stopping, about not needing to have all the answers. It wasn't something she had ever been taught. In her world, answers were demanded. The questions were never allowed to sit for long before someone expected a response, an explanation, an action. Here, though, it was different. Here there was no pressure to make everything fit into a neat little box. There was just the day, just the work, just the moments of peace between the hours of toil. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the land in a golden light, she found herself sitting by the fire outside. The man had finished his work for the day, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames crackle. She had never been good at quiet. She had always filled the silence with words, with explanations, with excuses. But here the quiet was different. It wasn't uncomfortable. It didn't feel like a void that needed to be filled. It felt natural, like a space for thought, for reflection. As the night wore on, she realized that she had been here for longer than she had expected. Days had turned into weeks, and now, with the passing of each day, she felt something shift within her. It wasn't just the land, or the work, or even the man who had taken her in. It was the feeling that she could finally breathe. The fear that had clung to her for so long, the constant tension in her chest, was starting to fade. It wasn't gone completely, but it was becoming more manageable. The idea of stopping, of choosing to stay instead of running, was beginning to feel like a real possibility. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the woman looked at the man, finally gathering the courage to speak. She had been wondering about his past for a while, and though she knew it wasn't her place to ask, the question slipped out before she could stop it. "How did you end up here?" she asked softly. "Why did you choose this life?" He didn't answer immediately, as if the question had caught him off guard. His gaze turned toward the fire, his eyes narrowing slightly as he stared into the flames. For a moment, she wondered if he would dismiss the question, as he often did with anything personal. But then, slowly, he spoke. "I didn't choose it. Not in the way you might think," he said, his voice low and steady. "I came here because it was what I needed. Life doesn't always give us the choices we want. Sometimes it gives us what we need, even if we don't know it at the time."
She listened closely, trying to read his face.
He was speaking so simply, but there was a depth to his words, a wisdom that she couldn't quite grasp. She wanted to ask more, but something told her it wasn't the time. She didn't have to know everything about him. What mattered was that he was here, offering her a chance to stop running, to find her own peace. The days continued to pass in a steady rhythm. The woman began to feel more connected to the land and the life that had settled around her. The work was hard, but it was satisfying. She found herself waking early each day, eager to start the chores that had become second nature. Feeding the animals, working the fields, and even taking care of the house. All of it felt like a new beginning, a chance to rebuild something she had lost long ago. One afternoon, as she was gathering eggs from the chicken coop, she heard the sound of hooves approaching. She looked up to see the man riding toward her, his hat low over his brow as he guided the horse toward the barn. She smiled at the sight, feeling a warmth inside her chest that she hadn't felt in years. It was a simple life, but it was hers now. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't worried about what would happen next. She wasn't consumed by the need to run. When the man dismounted, he looked at her with his usual calm demeanor, but there was something different in his gaze. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips, something rare and fleeting. He nodded toward the barn. "We've made good progress," he said, his voice carrying an unspoken pride. "The horses are settling in well. It's a good day." She nodded in agreement, her heart swelling with a sense of satisfaction she hadn't known in years. She had found something here, something that couldn't be measured in the miles she had run, or the things she had left behind. Here, in this quiet place, she had found the peace she had always been searching for. And for the first time in a long time, she knew that she didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know what tomorrow would bring. She could just live in this moment, with no fear of what might happen next. The seasons shifted slowly on the ranch. The days grew warmer, and the long stretches of quiet time under the sun became more frequent. The woman had spent enough time here now that the land seemed to have seeped into her bones. It was no longer just a place to rest. It was becoming part of her, a life she could settle into. Each morning the sun would rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and she would be there to witness it, just as she had for the past few weeks. The days were not rushed here. There was no need for hurry or worry about what the next moment might bring. As the days passed, the man remained as steady as ever, his calm presence the anchor that kept her from drifting too far into her own thoughts. The quiet way he moved through life had become something she began to understand. He didn't chase after things, didn't rush to make decisions, didn't force anything. He simply lived, and in that living, he found peace. There were still moments when the woman would feel the old restlessness rise within her. There were still nights when she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about her past, about the choices she had made, and the life she had left behind. But in those moments, she would remind herself that she didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know what came next. She was here, and that was enough. The man had shown her that sometimes the greatest thing you could do was simply to be, to live without constantly worrying about the next step. One evening, as the fire crackled softly outside, the man spoke for the first time about the future. She had always wondered what he thought about the idea of her staying here permanently. It was something that lingered in the back of her mind, but she had never dared to ask. She didn't want to impose, but as they sat in the quiet warmth of the firelight, he finally broke the silence. "You've been here a while now," he said, his voice low and calm. "You're free to stay as long as you want."
The words were simple, but they held a weight that she hadn't expected.
She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. It was the first time he had acknowledged that she had a choice. He wasn't asking her to stay. He wasn't trying to tie her to the land or to him. He was simply offering her the freedom to choose. She thought about it for a moment, her mind racing. The idea of staying here for good seemed so impossible at first, but now the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She didn't need to keep running. She didn't need to be afraid anymore. She had a place here, a life that she could build, and she had the chance to create something new. "I think I'd like to stay," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded, as though he had already known her answer. He didn't say anything more, but his face softened in the dim light of the fire. There was no need for more words. They both knew that the decision had already been made. Over the next few days, the woman began to settle into the life she had chosen. She worked alongside the man, caring for the animals, tending to the garden, and helping to fix up the ranch house. There was a new sense of purpose in her actions. She wasn't just working to survive anymore. She was building something that would last. She wasn't running from anything. She was moving forward, one step at a time. The man continued to be the steady presence he had always been. His calm demeanor never wavered, even when things didn't go as planned. The animals didn't always behave, the weather wasn't always predictable, and there were days when the work seemed endless. But through it all he remained patient. He didn't get frustrated, he didn't hurry. He just worked, and in his way he taught her that patience was the key to everything. It wasn't about getting everything perfect. It was about doing the work, being present in the moment, and trusting that things would fall into place. One day, while they were working in the field, the woman paused for a moment, her hands resting on the shovel as she looked out at the horizon. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the sun was shining down on the land, casting long shadows across the dirt. She realized for the first time that she had found something she had been searching for her entire life. Peace. She wasn't looking over her shoulder anymore. She wasn't worried about what was coming next. She was here, in this moment, and that was enough. The man was standing nearby fixing the fence. He glanced over at her, his expression as calm as always. "You found it, haven't you?" he said. She smiled softly, not needing to say anything in response. She had found peace. And it wasn't just the peace of the land. It was the peace that came from within. It was the peace of no longer running, of accepting the life that was before her, and of knowing that she could build something new, even if she didn't have all the answers. As the weeks passed, the ranch became more and more like home. The woman learned to live without fear, without the constant pressure of looking over her shoulder. She worked hard, but she did it with a sense of purpose that she had never known before. The days were filled with the steady rhythm of work, and the nights were spent by the fire, talking softly with the man, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. There were still moments when the woman would think about the life she had left behind. She would think about the people she had known, the choices she had made, and the mistakes that still haunted her. But those thoughts no longer had the power to control her. She had found a new life here, and in that life she had found the freedom to choose who she wanted to be. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting a warm glow over the land, the woman stood at the edge of the field, watching the light fade. The ranch was quiet now, the only sound the gentle rustling of the leaves in the trees and the occasional call of a bird. She breathed in deeply, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. She was free. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly living. The man came up beside her, his footsteps light on the ground. He stood next to her, looking out at the land they had worked so hard to build together. They didn't need to say anything. The silence between them was comfortable, a shared understanding that didn't need to be spoken. "You're part of this now," he said after a long pause. "This is your home, if you want it." She didn't need to say anything. The answer was in her eyes, in the quiet smile that curved her lips. This was her home now. This was where she belonged. And she knew, with certainty, that she had found the peace she had always been searching for.